do you do? 'Cause I'm feeling so good.
All right, hey HSM, it's good to be with you again as we go into episode 2 of this series called Canceled. And last week when we were together, we talked about this idea really of cancel culture and how social media can be pretty rough sometimes. You know, it can be a place where people get bullied, people get made fun of, just some irrational thoughts about, things people would say online but never say to your face. And many of you, if we were to ask and you were to raise hands, even tonight in a home, how many of you have been canceled? When it comes to cancel culture, many of you would raise a hand and say, yes, I have. And maybe some others would realize that maybe you've been a part of doing the canceling on someone as well. But so that's the ugly side of social media, but there's also an entertaining side too, right? I mean, it can be pretty entertaining, especially when your grandma's involved, right? I mean, because your grandma may not know how to do anything. This is intuitive for you. Like, you know how to use social media, you know how to log into Facebook or Instagram or all those kind of things, but your grandparents don't necessarily know. So quick question, how many of you have ever had to help family members with technology issues? Like, you were the tech support for your family. Quick raise of hands. You might, some murmurs like, yeah, you've had to do that, right? Now, it's cool to help people out on that stuff, isn't it? Because you get to show that you actually know something and you have some expertise that you can pass on to someone. But after a while, you can start to lose your patience, can't you? Like the 30th time that someone asks you something, you might just say, can you just watch the YouTube video on it? But then you realize, like, in order for that to happen, you're going to have to explain what YouTube is all about as well. So every day, you and I face opportunities, though, to help people in small ways, whether it's grandma with her technology and understanding what each emoji is and when to use them and when not to use them, or helping your little brother or your little sister tie their shoe and do something for them, or maybe telling somebody at the lunch table that they've got a little bit of leftover of the school lunch left over in their teeth. So, those type of things happen where you're trying to help someone. But depending on your mood, or depending on the other person, and depending on where you are and if you're busy and all those kind of things, you help them. Or maybe you don't. Everyone, I think, is helpful and generous with their time sometimes. But what about when it's inconvenient? What about when you have a whole bunch of other things to do? What about when you don't feel like it? Because every day you and I are surrounded by people who need help with things that are way more important than learning how to put another video on TikTok, right? And just to illustrate that, I want you to take a look at this video. And then after the video, I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to talk about that there at your home. What did that video do to you? What kind of emotions did it come up? So take a look.
Ano? Экси.
아까 홀로스코로 потерялась.
biraz ayıp oldu ya.
მურები რო წამისვათ და ჭურჭყანი რომ აცვია მეწყენა გავი წადის რომ მეუნებოდა
Now, I don't know what you were thinking about or what was going through your mind when you watched that or when it was over. Maybe it reminded you of a time when you needed to reach out and help somebody, but you didn't follow through on that. Or maybe it brought up time where you realized that you needed help and nobody showed up for you. And maybe it was like both of those. It brought to mind an instance in each one of them. Here's the deal. When we are in need, when you and I are in need, we are at our most vulnerable point. Because ultimately we're saying like, hey, I can't do this without someone stepping in to help me. I can't do it on my own. If I would have, I already would have done that. And we're most vulnerable. But when we see someone in need, we don't always respond with compassion and with care. Because sometimes we respond by being suspicious. Sometimes we respond by being impatient. Or sometimes we're just uncomfortable. I mean, case in point, how many of you gone by 152 in Church Road and seen a homeless guy there with a sign and he's looking to make eye contact and you're saying, I can't make eye contact, I can't make eye contact. I mean, here's the reality. Sometimes you and I are going to be the ones who are able to help someone, and sometimes you and I are going to be the ones that need help. We're not going to get out of this life without playing both parts. We're going to be able to help some people sometimes, but other times we're going to need someone to help. And so with that in mind, doesn't it seem like the world that we live in would be a much better place if everyone kind of bought into helping each other when we're vulnerable and when we're needy, no matter what it was, that we just kind of everyone bought into that? Because I think that's exactly the kind of world that Jesus wants his followers to be about building. While we're here on this planet, I think that's what Jesus wants us to do. Now, when we read the Gospels, which are really Jesus's biography, we find example after example after example of Jesus meeting the needs of vulnerable people in some of the most inopportune or inconvenient times. I mean, in fact, many of Jesus's were so full, and they were also filled with what you and I, when we view them, we would think that, well, it's just an interruption. But Jesus doesn't see it that way. So in Mark chapter 10, we see Jesus literally interrupted by someone's loud cries for help. Let's look at this together. Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 46 to 52. It says, "Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed him. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting beside the road. And when Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' 'Be quiet,' many of the people yelled at him. But he only shouted louder, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' And when Jesus heard him, he stopped and he said, 'Tell him to come here.' And so they called the blind man, essentially said, 'Hey, today's your day, buddy. Cheer up. Come on, he's calling you.' So Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and he came to Jesus. 'What do you want me to do for you?' Jesus asked. 'My rabbi,' the blind man said, 'I want to see.' And Jesus said to him, 'Go, for your faith has healed you.' Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road." Now, does that remind you at all of the video that we just watched together? I mean, Bartimaeus is pleading for help, but he's just told us to be quiet. Nobody had time for him. Nobody had time for his problems. He was just a beggar, and his issues were not worth spending time and attention on. But that's not true of Jesus, is it? Because Jesus leans in. Jesus leans in and gives Bartimaeus his time, his attention, and ultimately his help. And there's another story. Jesus is busy again, and he's in a large crowd, and he's on his way to help save the life of a dying girl, and he's interrupted again. Look at Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40. On the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. And then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. And as Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. And I love this because everyone denied it. And Peter says, "Hey, Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you. It's like everybody's touching you, Jesus. What do you mean?" And Jesus said, "Someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me." And when the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble, and she fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. And Jesus' response here, I love this. He says, "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Now this woman, because of her illness and probably also because of her gender, if we're being honest, would not have been seen as someone worthy of Jesus' attention and his time. But to Jesus, she was worthy of his attention, to the point where there in verse 48, what he calls her is incredible. He doesn't say woman. He says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Now, Jesus didn't just show us how to care for those in need. He actually teaches on it too. And showing us is super important. But when you see Jesus show us what's important or how to do this and also teach about it, we have to really pay attention here. So he uses a parable in Matthew that uses a couple of farm animals to teach us something important about the heart of God. And he uses sheep and goats. Now, sheep are all about community. When you have one separated, it's lost because it's got to be together. That's the type of animals that sheep are. They're in herds all the time. But goats are independent, and they're a little rebellious, and they can be kind of mindless and they just want to do their own thing. So I want you to keep that in mind here as we read Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 31. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." And then the king will turn to those on the left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me." And then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?" And he will answer, "I tell you the truth, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. Now, we could spend a whole lot of time on this parable, but here's the picture. The goats were too busy. They were too busy with their own lives to care for anybody else. Remember the video that we watched a little bit ago, and the man that was sitting there, and the girl, once she kind of had her makeup done and looked a little dirty and everything, and she comes up and the guy tries to get the restaurant staff to get her to take her away from him. He didn't have time for her. And so goats are too busy with their own lives to care for anybody else. Now, sheep were the ones that Jesus had observed their behavior, and he said, doing those kind of things, feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, all those kind of things. When you were doing those, Jesus had been observing, and it was like the sheep were doing those things to him. So sheep are the kind of people who look around and see where it is that they can help. So through both his examples and his teachings, Jesus consistently cared for people who had been canceled, who had been forgotten, who had been disrespected, who had been ignored. And so now what he does is he challenges you and me to do the same thing. And this is the big idea, to love people who are in need. And it sounds so simple, doesn't it? But it's way more complicated. So how does this really work? How do we meet the needs of others instead of canceling them? And so I want to give you kind of 4 things to remember as we go about this. The first thing is it's not only about our actions, it's about our hearts. It's not only about our actions, it's about our hearts. See, our hearts reveal to us what's really going on in our world. And Jesus is after our heart, not just after our behavior. So transformed hearts will always lead in the right direction. They're going to lead. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but transformed hearts are going to lead into a way that you live that honors Jesus. But right behavior can always mask an insincere heart. So transformed hearts will lead to right behavior, but right behavior isn't necessarily an indication of a transformed heart. So it's not only about our actions, it's about our hearts. The second thing, it's not only about loving others, it's about loving God. See, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you and I don't have the capacity to love people really well, because that actually comes from God. Because we love because he first loved us. God first loved us. So the more that we love God, the more that he increases our capacity to love others. And you may say, but I don't know if I have enough love for everything. Well, if you focus on loving God, he actually increases your capacity, increases your heart, increases your desire to love the people that he loves. So when you love God, then we love others in a more profound way, in a more real way, and we have the ability to do that as well. So it's not only about loving others, it's about loving God. The next one, it's not about what we have, it's about what we can give. Now, let's face it, you guys as high school students, you may not have a lot to give from a possessions, money, stuff type of standpoint. But here's what you have, and this is what every person has. We have time and presence. We have our time and we have our presence. And those are probably the most important and generous things that you and I have to give, because everyone has the same amount and it's valuable. Like once you spend time, you can't get it back. Once you give your presence to something, you can't take that back either. So you don't have to have lots of money and lots of stuff in order to help others. You just need to show up and spend time with people. And you can do that. Even in your busy life, even in my busy life, I can give people time and presence. So it's not about what we have, it's about what we can give. Finally, it's not about them, it's about us. Now, we live in a world that likes to be pretty tribal. Like this week, we have a Liberty North and a Liberty High School football game, and it's for a lot of notoriety, it's for a lot of bragging rights, and whoever goes on gets to go on to the top 2 or top 4 in the state. So we want to speak on tribes like it's them versus us. But we have to stop speaking as if we were just one tribe helping another. Like, hey, we're going to go help those people over there. And there's some key things, like when you use terms like those people or them or we're going to go help those, like what we're doing is we're dividing people into different types of people. And here's the reality. When you look around in your home, everybody is a human, and we're all on the same team. So it's not us versus anybody else. We're all us, and we have to learn how to get along. So all of us are equally loved, we're equally seen, and we're equally valued by God. And so, yes, there will always be something that's tribal that we need to, partake in, like you're going to this school versus this school and all those kind of things. But ultimately, all of us are on the same tribe. And we have to treat every person like they have a soul, because they do. And every soul will spend eternity somewhere. And so you and I, we're all part of the same team. We're all part of the same tribe. So it's not about them, it's about us. So how do we go about doing this? I mean, how can we care for the people around us? I mean, do we hang out at a restaurant and wait until a little girl shows up? I mean, do we ask God for the power to help us heal blind people and sick people? I mean, how do we practically do this? And what does it look like to see and need and respond in love instead of responding in rejection? We're going to watch a video here in just a second, and let me just kind of explain it to you. So this young man goes to a high school, and he's basically getting bullied and getting ostracized because of his clothes. And it's because he doesn't have any clothes and he wears the same thing all the time. And so ultimately a couple of guys realized that, hey, this is not a good thing that we're doing. We need to treat him better, treat him with respect. And so they spend their own money and they buy him some shoes and clothes and that type of thing. But that's not all they did. They include him, they bring him in. And so it's not like they just pity him and throw some stuff at him to make him fit in with the rest of them. They actually include him in what's going on. And so they had to give up some stuff. They sacrificed money to buy him some clothes. They also gave him respect, and they also gave him kindness. But, they probably also had to sacrifice something else in the short term too. Because maybe they had to sacrifice their popularity, or maybe even some friends temporarily. Because they chose to go first, and then others would follow.
These two students are showing how kindness can go a very long way.
The best day of my entire life was basically.
That is Michael Todd, a freshman at MLK Prep in Memphis, Tennessee. The two seen here, Christopher Graham and Antoine Garrett, made Todd's day.
Michael was getting made fun of for 3 straight weeks at his new school.
I've been bullied my entire life.
He would wear the same clothes every day, and students at MLK Prep would mock him for it.
That's right, bullied for wearing the same clothes to school each day. Seen in this video, Graham and Garrett gave him a quantitative gift: shoes, shirts, and much more. He wasn't smiling or anything, and I was like, I think this is going to make you smile. We're in the same third period, and I apologize for laughing at you, and I want to give you something to make it up, Graham said. According to WPXI, people from states away have seen the video and want to send Todd clothes.
Here's another example. It's not as character building maybe as this one, but I saw right after Halloween that there was a family that had a young son who's had some medical treatments related to cancer treatment. And so he wasn't able to partake, and they weren't able to answer the door, just trying to be careful with COVID and everything. And so they left a sign out explaining that. And so the mom noticed that people were stopping by the sign, and they were doing that, and they were like lingering a little bit. And she went out to look. And so what was happening is people were coming by, and instead of just going on and not doing anything, they were leaving part of their candy there too by the sign. I thought that was kind of cool, but it took somebody to start that, right? And once they started, and somebody else thought, oh, hey, yeah, they left some candy. Let's all leave some candy too. And so what are you going to be first on? What are you going to take the initiative to help someone that everyone else, including you, have been overlooking? Because in Jesus' time, people in need were often canceled by society instead of helped. They were ignored, they were judged, they were mocked, and they were left to ultimately to fend for themselves. And we still, let's be honest, we kind of have that problem today, don't we? We do. So if you and I want to love like Jesus, and I believe that you do, and I know that I do, we have to love people in need. And when we do, it's like we're doing that to Jesus himself. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the example and the teaching of how we can love people unconditionally and not cancel them. Sometimes we do that in a way that we don't realize that we're doing it, but help us to be intentional with the way that we treat people, including our family and our closest friends. In Christ's name, amen. Hey, we'll see you guys next time. Just a reminder, mark on your calendar December 6th, because when we meet in person again, it won't be at church, it'll be at B&B Theater. So look for some stuff around that. It'll be a great time to invite a friend. And other than that, we'll see you next time. Have a great week.